You're watching News Channel 8. More local, more often.
Today, authors, journalists, and activists gathered here in Washington to discuss free speech. The conference, titled Libel Lawfare, Silencing Criticism of Radical Islam, is part of a contentious issue that's starting to get a lot of attention. Joining me now live tonight is Brooke Goldstein, director of the Legal Project at the Middle East Forum, and James Taranto, columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Great to see you both. Thanks for coming in. Well, let me start for those who may be unfamiliar with this issue. What's at stake and where do you stand? Brooke, you organized this conference today, so we'll start with you.
Well, as you said, it was called Libel Lawfare, silencing public discussion of radical Islam. And the issue is that there is a concerted effort both on the national and international level. There are many parties filing lawsuits against anyone who is brave enough to speak out against radical Islam, terrorism, and its sources of financing. The Legal Project, along with the Federalist Society and the University of Virginia, all feel that this is a threat to free speech within this country, so we invited distinguished panelists such as James Taranto here to discuss the issue.
And James, where do you stand on this?
Well, it is a concern. The good news is that America has the most expansive and robust tradition of free speech in the world. And so, for example, we hear a lot about people being sued for libel in England. The reason people get sued for libel in England is because it's very difficult for a public figure to win a libel suit here. The plaintiff not only needs to prove that the statement is false, but also, if he's a public figure, that it was reckless disregard for the truth. So it's very hard to win. You hear about a lot of people being prosecuted in Europe for hate speech, for things that aren't really hate speech, that are just criticism of this group or that group, usually Muslims of one sort or another. In America, people always say the Constitution protects free speech, it doesn't protect hate speech. That's not true. The Constitution protects hate speech. In America, neo-Nazis have a constitutional right to march through a neighborhood populated with Holocaust survivors. Now, we may not like to see that kind of march, but it means that the rest of us enjoy an enormous amount of First Amendment protection, free speech protection, that people elsewhere in the world don't.
But you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right, I mean, there are limits to free speech, but I think where James and I disagree is regardless of the constitutional protections, regardless of your First Amendment right to speak freely about issues of public concern, that's not stopping people from filing frivolous and malicious lawsuits. And the keynote is, frivolous. The goal of these lawsuits is to intimidate people into silence. And what you see a lot of the time are the lawsuits are dropped right before the discovery process. Now, what happens during discovery? You get to prove the truth of the claim.
Right.
So, for example, if you say XYZ Islamist society is being funded by Hamas, and they sue you for defamation, you have the right to prove the truth of your claim, which is why most of these lawsuits are being dropped before discovery. But the defendants are still paying in time and money spent defending their rights. And what it's creating is a very detrimental, chilling effect here in this country. You have Random House Publishing Group, for example. They refused to publish a novel, The Jewel of Medina, about Muhammad's child bride, out of fear for violent reprisals within the Muslim community. So that's the problem.
So is there legislation that needs to be passed making sure that people should be able to be free of these kind of lawsuits?
Well, yeah, I mean, right now we have the Free Speech Protection Act that is being considered before both houses, sponsored by Senator Specter and Lieberman. And what that does is it nullifies foreign libel judgments against American authors. At the same time, I would encourage every state to enact an anti-SLAPP legislation, which is basically legislation that protects against strategic litigation against public participation.
And you don't think this is necessary?
Well,
or do you?
I'm not sure about the libel tourism legislation. I have yet to be persuaded either way on that, because none of these judgments I learned today have actually been collected since New York Times versus Sullivan 45 years ago, which set forward our current libel regime. Anti-SLAPP statute sounds like a good idea to me. A lot of states have those already. These sorts of malicious suits have a long history of being used by people who want to silence other people. But free speech doesn't necessarily mean speech free of hassle or free of cost, although we wish that it did.
All right, well, it's a fascinating subject, and I wish I had more time because I'm just getting started, but they tell me I'm out of time. So, James Taranto, Brooke Goldstein, we'll just have to have you back. How about that?
Agreed.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Appreciate your being here tonight.